is drawing a line in the sand during his holiday vacation in Florida, telling Democrats what they're going to have to give up to get any deal on DACA. Plus, Sheriff David Clark will be here to tell us why the left needs to admit the president is actually helping minorities. Also, judges in Oregon make another controversial ruling in a case that pits a baker's religious liberties against a lesbian couple who wanted a wedding cake. And a major buzzkill from BuzzFeed, the fallout after an apparent attempt at humor falls flat over an article called, quote, 37 Things White People Need to Stop Ruining in 2018, end quote. Well, let's start with the president practicing the art of the deal even while on vacation. He gave Democrats his bottom line for any DACA deal on amnesty for the illegal immigrants called Dreamers. The president tweeted today, quote, the Democrats have been told and fully understand that there can be no DACA without the desperately needed wall at the southern border and an end to the horrible chain migration and ridiculous lottery systems of immigration, etc. We must protect our country at all costs. Can the president get the Democrats to yes, and will his own base accept amnesty? Let's discuss that with Fox News contributor Steve Cortez, a former Trump campaign operative and spokesman for the Hispanic 100, and Stephen Mulroy, a law professor at the University of Memphis and a former federal prosecutor. Happy New Year, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be a contentious issue as we turn to the March 5th deadline that is out there on DACA. Professor, I want to start with you. You know, my concern is that Democrats, they like the issue. They just don't actually want to solve it. They always say, oh, we need comprehensive. We need to do all these things. The president's ask is pretty simple. Let's build a wall. Something that Democrats have supported in the past. Is it unreasonable to think that we should protect our border and build a wall?
Well, it's not unreasonable to think that we should protect our border, but we don't necessarily need to build a wall in order to do that. I mean, the actual wall itself, if it were to cover the exact complete expanse of the border, would cost tens of billions of dollars and would probably not even be effective, because what sections of wall we already have, experience has shown that you can tunnel under them or put ramps or ladders over them. So if you're going to be spending tens of billions of dollars on a wall that actually won't work and will simply alienate relations with Mexico, why not use that money in a better way by increasing border security agents and doing economic development in Mexico to reduce the demand for illegal immigration, increase guest worker programs? There are a lot more efficient, efficacious ways of tackling this problem that would not alienate Mexico, would actually work, and would be a better use of our tax dollars.
Well, Steve Cortez, the president's going to get his wall, isn't he? He's going to get the $1.8 billion that he wanted. And I don't know how he could settle for anything less. As President Obama said, elections have consequences, right? And this is one of the things the president promised he was going to do.
They sure do. And Jason, this was a pillar of his electoral mandate. And I call him President Promise Keeper, because what he did in 2017 is keep one promise after another. We are going to get that wall. And by the way, the wall's not just good for the United States. I would disagree with the professor. It's also actually good for Mexico, because it has a problem on its southern border, largely because of our porous southern border. So getting our border under control between Texas and Arizona and California and Mexico is good policy. Often good neighbors need good fences, and that's what we need between the U.S. and Mexico. But more importantly, I really want to give the president so much credit for what he's already done. Even before the big, beautiful wall goes up, illegal crossings have plunged under this president. Why? Because of clear-eyed rhetoric and better enforcement. And don't take my word for it, by the way. The director of ICE, Tom Homan, said that this president has done more for border security than the 6 previous presidents combined. So he is already enhancing our economic and national security by securing our borders.
Now, Professor, you got to admit that the numbers are reflective on the reduction in the border crossing, but they're still happening. What do you attribute the lower crossing rate to be, other than the election of Donald Trump?
It's important to remember that actually immigration border crossings were actually on the decline for years prior to the election of Donald Trump. We actually now have a negative net outflow of immigration. There are more people leaving than coming in, and that was the case well before Donald Trump was elected. And as to whether he needs to keep his promise,
I got to tell you, I was the chairman of a committee in Congress, and we held multiple hearings. I cannot. I would love to see those numbers where you think that we were actually on the decline with President Obama. I mean, asylum seekers, others that were coming across this border were much higher than they are today.
Well, the source that I would use right now would be PolitiFact, which actually did a recent study a few months ago on this very thing. But as to the politics of it, let's also remember that President Trump had previously agreed with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi to give them DACA reform in exchange for beefed up border security without the wall. Why would it make sense for them to now negotiate against themselves and go backwards as part of the negotiations between the White House and Capitol Hill?
But, Professor, you'd be okay if it's not necessarily a physical wall, but if it went to border security. I would probably personally disagree with you that economic development in northern Mexico is, I don't know why the Americans have to pay for that. But what else? So you'd be okay, right, Professor, if it was not just a wall, but border security, and the definition of that we might want to haggle about, correct?
Right. Well, I think that actually increased border security and increased guest worker program would be a more efficient use of our tax dollars than actually building a wall, which I think will be way more expensive than we expect because of the land rights that we would have to buy through eminent domain and the fact that it's not really very effective. So I think it makes sense to talk about border security and DACA reform without the wall.
So, Steve Cortez, what else is the president going to have to get? Because there is a long laundry list: the lottery, asylum reform, there's DACA. What else do you think is imperative? You've been close to Donald Trump. What do you think is imperative?
No, Jason, and here's what I think is on the way, and here's what I've told the president personally. And I disagree with some of my colleagues on Team Trump, people whom I respect. I do believe the DACA recipients, and they're not dreamers, by the way. I don't call them dreamers. Americans have dreams, too, and they're not kids. They are adults. But I believe DACA recipients are a different category. I disagree with a lot of people I respect on that issue. But having said that, and this is what I've told the president, and I believe what he will do, is we need things in return. And the big things are border security, more barricades, more resources for the border, but also, we can't just stop there, an end to chain migration. Chain migration has been a disaster for the United States. It affronts our national security. It affronts our economic security. Right now, and I'm the son of an immigrant and an Hispanic, the majority of immigrant-headed households in the United States receive some form of welfare. That's a tragedy. That's terrible policy. And it's nothing like our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents faced when they came here, when they wanted nothing from the United States other than an opportunity. So we're not doing immigration right, largely because of chain migration. That has to end. So we have to have a grand bargain, which I do believe is going to happen in January. DACA recipients protected, end to chain migration, resources at the border.
Gentlemen, thank you. Happy New Year. I appreciate you joining us in this conversation. Earlier on Fox News, Senator Lindsey Graham came on and said there was no possible way they were going to do DACA by itself, that was just political theater. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out starting in January. Well, it's been a two-front war for President Trump this year, fighting not just the Democrats, but most of the media, too. But we'll tell you why he thinks he's going to win them over starting next year. That's next. Plus, we'll take a look at how this freezing weather across much of the country may affect your holiday. Coming right up. President Trump has been at war with much of the media, tagging them as fake news, and often with good reason. In 2017, we saw an unprecedented number of significant corrections from major media outlets, especially on stories attacking the president. But President Trump believes their tune will change dramatically starting next year. Yesterday, he told the New York Times, "Another reason that I'm going to win another 4 years is because newspapers, television, all forms of media will tank if I'm not there, because without me, their ratings are going down the tubes." And for good measure, he added, "Without me, the New York Times will indeed not be the failing New York Times, but the failed New York Times." That's a pretty bold prediction, but could he be right? Fox News contributor and radio host Tammy Bruce is with us. Also joining us is political commentator Ben Kissel. Thank you both for being here. Happy New Year.
Yeah, same to
Ben,
you.
let me start with you. I worry that this D.C. bubble, the establishment media, and particularly the hard left, they just don't understand Donald Trump. They don't get him. They don't want to get him. They don't want to understand him. They just want to throw as many barbs his way, and they kind of actually play into his hand. But do you think the liberals and the media actually understand Donald Trump?
Well, I think the liberals in the media understand Donald Trump just fine. There's a lot to correct when Donald Trump gives an interview. In the interview that you're referencing with the New York Times, for example, he misquoted or got something wrong 24 times. This whole notion that media is against Donald Trump, the television news is against Donald Trump, is a total misnomer. It's a complete and utter lie. He got $2 billion worth of free media from these news outlets when he was running in 2016. This is just another example of Donald Trump wanting to raise up his own celebrity as opposed to raise up lower income individuals in this country. He needs to focus on being the president, not being famous.
Tammy, I've never heard President Trump say, he's running to become famous. He was pretty much famous when he started running.
Yeah.
But do you think the liberals and the left, do they get and understand President Trump? I mean, why he became President Trump?
I don't think so. They don't even really understand themselves. Look, just because you're stalking someone doesn't mean you love them, right? You've got Trump derangement syndrome. And this is about a focus and an obsession on the president because he was something that was unpredictable, that they couldn't predict, and that they got wrong, and the end result they got wrong. So it remains fascinating. But what I love about that tweet and what the president does is that, look, he's got a very dry sense of humor, and he's trolling them. This is fascinating because it also highlights the shift between last year and this year. Last year, it was an attack. It was through the campaign, and that there was a mission to derail him as the legacy media, as a propaganda arm for the Democrats. But now look at what's happened. His ratings, his approval rating on Thursday was matching President Obama's at the same time in his first year. And you've got the media's approval rating pretty much at the level of where the cockroaches are. So when you think about who's won this fight, Jason, it is the president. He's survived this year. He's doing well. He's got major legislation going. We've got 7 more years to go, and he's having a good time, and he's telling them that he's not going anywhere.
He has the lowest approval ratings of any president after 1 year since polling. So that's a total lie, and you can't just let that
have always been accurate, haven't they been? I mean,
he's citing
Donald
one
Trump
outsider poll. He cites one Rasmussen poll because it has the numbers that he particularly cares about.
Because the election was a bit of a poll, right?
This whole idea that Donald Trump is trolling the media is unnerving and disturbing, as it should be. We have North Korea. We have very significant situations happening globally. The last thing our president needs to do is act like that overweight person in his parents' basement, the same person that he said might have interacted with the Russians or interrupted the campaign in 2016.
Let's give Tammy a chance here. Yes, Tammy, go ahead.
I think what you've just heard proves my point. And what we've got is an individual who clearly is governing and doing a very good job, and every now and then he might put out a tweet, and there is this volume of an emotional reaction that is outsized. Everything they accuse the president of doing is the nature of the reaction to him. And it has worked to his benefit because the American people, when you see this, the American people realize that what he says about the media, what has finally been exposed about the media, is a level of unfairness, not just about being adversarial. We want an adversarial press, but now it's oppositional and it's deranged. And this is what the American people keeps them from being able to trust the media at this point.
The most emotional people are diehard Trump supporters. I see it on my Twitter feed on a regular basis. I assure you that it's not the snowflakes on the left causing such a kerfluffle.
My dear, not everything is exposed on Twitter.
Well, tell your president that then, because everything seems to be Twitter for him. For example, tweeting about Vanity Fair, tweeting about Anna Wintour. How does that help someone get a job? How does that help a lower-income family reach the next bracket of success?
Excuse me. Again, we filibustering here. This also does not help the conversation. But because you see as everything is having come through Twitter or social media, that's a pretty good example of projection. The fact is, what everyone's missing and what liberals miss is the fact that governing is going on. The president is changing this country. He's changing the world. He's having a good time, and he's doing a good job of it. And I think that you can, people can laugh and people can filibuster, but he's doing his job.
Ben, we're going to let you have the last word. Ben, you get the last word. Go ahead.
This isn't a John Hughes film. This isn't John Candy as president. I don't really care if my president's having a great time or not. He needs to govern, and he needs to help the people that he promised to help in this country. A lot of them voted for him, and a lot of them are wondering where is their reward for doing so.
Tammy, Ben, thank you very much. I guess the last comment I make on that is would look at the numbers. Look at the end result. The economy's doing better. The stock market's up. Unemployment's doing better. And we're about to do a segment that I think will highlight that people across the entire political spectrum are
Wall
benefiting.
Street doesn't reflect Main Street, but...
well, in large part it does at times, and we're going to have the next segment. Stay tuned for that. But you don't need a weatherman to tell you how cold it is across most of the country right now, but you do need one to warn you about how much worse it may get and the treacherous travel conditions this holiday weekend. Let's get an update from Fox News Chief Meteorologist Rick Reichmuth in New York.
Jason, yeah, obviously the cold has been here for a number of days already, and we have a lot of days to go till we are done with this. In fact, probably the better part of 10 to 12 more days before this cold air mass goes away. Keep in mind, we're still at the end of December, beginning of January, coldest time of the year, and so it's still going to remain cold once it's gone. But this brutal cold hopefully will go away. Right now, temperatures obviously really cold all the way towards the north. That cold air intrusion will continue to happen, and it kind of happens behind these clipper systems that will continue to go through. Right now, we've got pretty significant snow. Some spots maybe 4 or 5 inches with this band of snow setting up across parts of Illinois, Indiana, in towards Ohio. The ground is so cold, obviously all that snow will stick to the roads immediately, causing really dangerous conditions across all the roadways. Erie, Pennsylvania, by the way, more snow on the way this weekend, probably about another 12 to 18 inches or so. You would like to not see any more of that. We also have really big rain coming into the Pacific Northwest, a higher elevation getting the snow, probably 1 to 2 feet here across the mountains of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. Good news, at least for one spot for skiing. Meanwhile, that clipper system is going to dive throughout the overnight hours here in across places from D.C. up towards Philadelphia, eventually exiting the coast. Not a major snowmaker, but because, again, the ground is so cold, it will stick very quickly, maybe 1 or 2 inches for some folks. But behind that, the colder air really settles in once again. So that sets us up for maybe close to history for New Year's Eve in New York City, at least coldest ever 100 years ago, 1 degree. We're not going to be anywhere near that, but the second coldest is 11 degrees, and we're going to be right around that amount, that temperature around midnight. 12 degrees, say maybe could be 10, 12, somewhere in there. Wind chill feeling like below zero, so certainly the cold air is in. Want to tell you, tomorrow, take a look at this. The high temperature, minus 18 in Fargo. That's the high actual air temperature. You get a little bit better Sunday, maybe in towards minus 9. And here you go. Day one of the new year, 18 degrees in New York City, minus 1 in Fargo, 24 in Little Rock, 30 in Dallas. So the cold obviously here for a little bit of time. Jason?
Rick, thank you. The president hasn't been just fending off attacks by mainstream media. He's also been struggling to get credit where it's due. Up next, we'll look at a big underreported story this year, some significant improvements in the lives of minority groups. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Ingraham Angle. I'm Jason Chaffetz in for Laura Ingraham. Decades of liberal policies have done little for minorities living in America's major cities. By contrast, after just 1 year under President Trump, African-American unemployment has reached a 17-year low. The national unemployment rate for black Americans ages 16 and over fell to 7.3%. The overall crime rate in America's 30 largest cities, which disproportionately affects minority groups, fell by 2.7%. The murder rate in those cities declined by 5.6%. But will the left ever admit that President Trump may actually be helping minorities? Let's debate that with former Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark, who's in Milwaukee tonight, and here in Washington, attorney Monique Presley. Thank you both for being here. Happy New Year, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
You have to admit, Monique, right, that the numbers under Donald Trump are actually trending in the right direction, that the economy is doing well, and that everybody on the full political spectrum is benefiting.
The numbers, specifically the crime numbers, are doing well. They are trending well, as they have been for the past 6 years. And the unemployment numbers in the African-American community are continuing to trend well, as they have been for the past 6 years. When you mention numbers such as a 2.7% drop this year, well, there was a 2.8% drop last year. There was a 2.5% drop the year before that. So we've been seeing, actually, for about 84 months now, a decrease in the unemployment numbers for African Americans. That's not really something that I can give.
But that
this
was
administration
unexpected
credit
that Donald Trump, you didn't think that Donald Trump was actually going to continue to move the numbers in the right direction and things would get better for minority groups throughout the country.
I can't actually name a single thing this president has done in order to move that forward. All I can give him credit for in that area is not messing it up. I'm hoping that the trend continues and that the numbers are even larger. But when you say it's 2.7% in a year, really you've got to look at, okay, but month by month, it's been decreasing 0.2% for the past 84 months. Is that really something that this president
there
can
are a
for?
lot of things. Sheriff, let me bring you into this conversation. What have you seen that President Trump's doing that's actually helping the minority communities across the country?
First of all, Jason, what I just heard is purely delusional. Everything is coming up roses in the President Trump economy. President Trump, when he looks out into the economy, he doesn't see ethnicity and color and gender. He sees the American worker, and he knows that they're looking for meaningful work. And so he has put forth less regulation, lower taxes, which helps companies hire people when they turn those profits around. Under the Obama economy, compare and contrast, he had his boot on the neck of the American economy with his job-killing regulations, his high taxes. We were told under President Obama that a 16% black unemployment rate was the new normal. Now it's down to nearly 7%, almost below 7%, a 17-year low. That spans almost 3 administrations. So you can say what you want about what Obama did to turn the economy around. But again, I'll remind you, we were told that was the new normal. Job losses, consumer confidence was down. And by the way, black homeownership is up under Donald Trump, too. So Donald Trump, when he started out campaigning, he said to the black voters, hey, look, give you a chance. What do you have to lose? And now he's producing. So I see nothing but good for all Americans, but specifically in the black community. A 17-year low in the unemployment rate.
So, Monique, the Congress just passed and the president's just signed a new tax bill. It's going to reduce the rates. Do you believe that's going to help in the minority communities or not help in the minority communities?
No, I don't. And if you think about just the tremendous amount of debt that we're going to have to shoulder. And
suddenly the Democrats are all concerned about the debt.
Isn't it odd how everyone's changed positions? Suddenly the Republicans don't care about the debt and are adding to it and bringing up infrastructure bills and are all excited about them. I'm kind of wondering if the GOP has an identity crisis. But I do want to deal with what Sheriff Clark just said. He said 16.9% was supposed to be the new normal. I don't know who he was talking to. Merry Christmas, by the way, Sheriff Clark. But the point is, it hasn't been that high for 5 years, and it has been going down.
I want to go back to actually what I asked you about,
Mm-hmm.
which is allowing the minority communities and all Americans to keep more money in their own wallets. That's a good thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so why all the opposition to the tax plan when it will lower the rate at which they're having to pay their taxes?
Well, I think you know that it's not about the fact that I get to keep $50 in my pocket.
It's more than 50
It's
bucks.
that the nth percentile in the United States gets to keep millions more in their pockets, and that the corporations are the biggest winners of all. It's not whether somebody gets to keep $1. It's that when a person who doesn't have any money just gets to keep $3 while people who have plenty of it get to keep 30 million, the disparities are pretty clear, and that's what people are having a problem with.
$30 million example. But Sheriff, what's your take on this tax plan and what it's going to do in minority communities?
Well, of course it's going to help. You know, more blacks have moved into the middle class. Some have even moved into the upper middle class, and that's who this tax cut is going to benefit. Look, when people can keep more of their own money, they can maybe get their kids in the black community out of these failing K-12 urban schools and get them into private schools. They got to dig a little deeper into their pocket to be able to do that sort of thing. So as long as all Americans get to keep more of their money, we know how to spend our money better than the federal government does. So I just think that that's a good thing.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Monique. Sheriff, I've got one more issue I want to talk to you about before we say goodbye to you. I want to get your reaction about a report out tonight over an alleged incident between you and a passenger on a flight to Milwaukee. This took place almost a year ago. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel is reporting the FBI got involved, and there is this document that I've actually read exonerating you from the Department of Justice But while there are no charges, the passenger has filed a civil lawsuit against you. I would like to get your take on it.
Well, it's a frivolous lawsuit, and it has yet to be adjudicated, so I can't say too much. But this is a fake news story. I don't know how Donald Trump feels to be the subject of fake news from the liberal media. As you indicated, I sent you the letter. They found no wrongdoing. That case is closed. And I was informed of that last May. So here we are in December, and they're trying to redig this story, rehash it with lies interwoven in between it to make it seem like this is something new. There was no wrongdoing. I was doing good police work at the time, and I think the United States Attorney's Office recognized that, and that's why they said there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. This
Sheriff,
is a big, fat, nothing burger.
Sheriff, I appreciate you being here. To Monique as well, we wish you both a happy New Year. Coming up next, a ruling in Oregon is putting the issue of gay rights versus religious liberties back in the headlines. We'll tell you about who won this round and why in just a minute. It's one of the most difficult legal issues of our times. How to protect both newly established gay rights and our long-standing religious liberties when they come into conflict. The Oregon Court of Appeals ruled yesterday against a couple who were fined $135,000 after their bakery declined to make a wedding cake for lesbian partners. The attorney for bakers, Melissa and Aaron Klein, said his clients were deprived of the Constitution's promises of religious liberty and free speech. How do we find that balance in these thorny issues when everybody's rights want to be respected? Joining us now for this discussion from Austin, Texas, is Robert Henneke, the General Counsel and Director for the Center for the American Future, along with Robin Biro, an LGBTQ activist and an Army Ranger veteran who is in Atlanta. First, Robin, I want to thank you for your service to our country and protecting the United States and your service in our military. I really do appreciate that. But I want to start with Robert here. Why is this a religious liberty First Amendment issue as opposed to what Robin's going to argue, which is something a bit different than that? Why does religious liberty and the First Amendment trump what is going on here?
Jason, thank you for having me on the program. The central issue in this case is whether the judiciary should decide what constitutes artistic expression. Legally, it's uncharted territory for courts to say what is art and what is not. And here, the Oregon Appellate Court got it wrong when they decided that the artistry expressed by Mrs. Klein in her custom handcrafted cakes was not entitled to the same type of First Amendment protection that's afforded to other mediums of artistry and artistic expression.
Now, they did have an Oregon state law that they were looking to, right? But the issue that they're going to be arguing and wanting to appeal is going to be based on the First Amendment issue, correct?
Well, the way they got around that was in going into the public doctrine that looks at ordinary businesses engaged in commerce as brick and mortar type operations that fall outside of typical First Amendment freedom of expression and religious freedom protections. But the court did that to get to the end result that it wanted to accomplish. And in doing so, it ignored the fact that Mrs. Klein's business was not just an ordinary bakery. It was a service and artistic expression that she did using her hands in creating these type of cakes, which was the way that she expressed herself. And the Constitution is clear that the First Amendment protects that type of artistic expression, which unfortunately the Oregon court failed to recognize and got wrong here.
Now, Robin, as you look at this case, how do you see it? Because my guess is you have got a little different take on this.
I do, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to make one point clear. The reason that the fine was $135,000 was because these bakers doxed the individuals who were declined service. They put their personal information out, attacked their children, turned them into CPS, and they vilified them. This has nothing to do with artistic expression. They flat out denied them service. That's discrimination. That is not an American value. And frankly, I would like to point out that I really see this as an identity politic issue on the side of the right. LGBT Americans just want to be treated like everybody else. The golden rule. I do not want to be turned away and discriminated against. This is not about cakes. This is just wanting to be treated the same as everyone else. We would frankly like to stop this identity politic issue of being singled out. I happen to be a gay Army Ranger. My Ranger buddies never treated me any different than any of my peers. As long as I shot fine and held my Ranger standards, nobody cared.
Now, do you believe, Robert, though, or Robin, I should say, do you believe there's any room for religious liberty? I mean, if this really, truly is a long-standing, true belief in their religious liberty, why can't they make this decision?
That's a great question. I'm glad you posed it. There's a case in Colorado where a customer wanted to make a cake in the shape of a Bible that said homosexuality is a sin. And in that case, that was a First Amendment issue, but the baker sold them the cake, sold them the bag of icing, and said they could write whatever they wanted to on it. So in that case, it didn't violate any laws. They didn't discriminate against the person's religious liberties. So that's where the line is. This is about discrimination, though. These people were flat out told that they were not going to be served because they were gay. And I understand the argument that why give a homophobic baker your money, but the issue is it comes down to discrimination. And that's just not, like I said, it's not an American value. It's not okay. We are all just Americans. Please, let's move past identity politics. No one cares that I'm gay, and this religious baker has no right to force her religious beliefs on me in a public business.
Robert, where is the line with religious liberty? And this case is ultimately going to be decided by the Supreme Court because there is a different case that is pending before the court, correct?
Well, that's right. And this Oregon case, the Klein case, will end up being a footnote of little consequence given that the United States Supreme Court is currently considering the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. And in the recent oral arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court, the justices, specifically Justice Kennedy and Justice Roberts, were talking about where this tension exists in the tug and war between the two sides and how they're grappling with that issue. Unfortunately, the Oregon Appellate Court avoided that issue and instead shoehorned Mrs. Klein's artistry into just rather the public doctrine in terms of a brick-and-mortar business. The real discrimination here is in not recognizing that the masterpieces that she created with her hands were her form of expression and that she's entitled to First Amendment protection for that artistry, especially insofar as that it's an expression of her also genuine, deeply held religious beliefs.
Robin, I'll give you the last word quickly. We've got just a few seconds.
Last word, like I said, just please treat us the same as anyone else. Live by the golden rule. Treat us the way that you yourself want to be treated. Please, discrimination is never okay, and that's what I see this as.
Gentlemen, thank you both. Happy New Year. Coming up, we'll tell you how one of President Trump's problems with North